is EWA Radio. Each week we spotlight some of the biggest stories from the education beat and the reporters who bring them to you. In 2010, billionaire Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg announced an unprecedented gift. He would donate $100 million to the public schools of Newark, New Jersey, money that would eventually be matched by private partners. What followed was an epic experiment in top-down interventions, meticulously detailed by veteran journalist Dale Russakoff at The Washington Post. She spent more than 3 years reporting the story, first serialized in the New Yorker magazine, and now told in greater detail in The Prize, Who's in Charge of America's Schools. Dale, welcome to EWA Radio.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
To start off, this book has some big personalities and looks at how politics and education practice overlapped and actually collided in the name of school reform. We had New Jersey Governor Christie, Cory Booker, then the mayor of Newark and now a U.S. Senator, and Mark Zuckerberg. Would any of this have happened if each of those people in their own way wasn't a larger-than-life character?
No, I think that's a good point. It really started in large part because of the celebrity of all of these people.
You know, the title of your book, as I said, is The Prize, Who's in Charge of America's Schools? And I want to emphasize that there's a question mark on the end of that. What's the answer?
Well, I think that there's never a final answer because education is a struggle. It's a struggle at the local level, at the national level, and in between at the state level. Philanthropists also play a role because, especially in the last 10 years, the very wealthy philanthropists have gotten involved in education and are trying to change it by making very targeted but large investments in different districts where they see the potential for reform. So you have, like in Newark, the struggle has always been between the politicians who are almost like the bosses of Newark and everyone else. Sometimes people rise up and take power away from them, but they always seem to get it back at the end. Although in Newark, the state took over the schools 20 years ago because of the neglect and real abuse of education by the political bosses in Newark. And the state has controlled it ever since 1995, has controlled the education budget and the schools. And so really in Newark, there was this fight to get that control back.
We talked about this as a top-down intervention, but really your reporting is from the inside out. You take us into the classrooms, we meet the teachers, we meet the students, and a lot of school administrators who are putting their hearts and souls into this school. Was there a moment in the book for you that, looking back, was particularly difficult to write about, or perhaps something that you observed that you hesitated to put in there?
There was one family of 5 girls that I was following for several months, thinking that maybe they were going to be characters whose stories I would tell throughout the book. And their family was so incredibly troubled and became more so. The mother was mentally ill, and the mother and the father had real violent disagreements. And I just ended up feeling like I couldn't tell their story because it was just too extreme. And the mother at a certain point decided she didn't want to cooperate anymore. So there was no way I would tell the story after that. But I actually just began to feel that this family was in so much distress that telling their story wouldn't really tell you. Although there is tremendous trauma and stress in the lives of Newark children commonly, it's not an unusual thing. This family's problems were so extreme that I felt that writing about them wouldn't be fair to them and wouldn't be fair to the story.
You know, it seemed to me from your narrative that while Cory Booker, Christie, and Mark Zuckerberg were very invested in this project at the outside, their interest may not have waned, but certainly their energy was being pulled in different directions as this process continued. At any point, did anyone say to you, we're going to cut off access? I mean, they gave you an extraordinary degree of ability to sit in on private meetings, to record what was happening. At any point, did it feel like this experiment was spiraling out of their control and they decided maybe we don't want her to write this book?
The access it waned as time went on. So I was allowed to sit in on a lot of private meetings at the beginning, but as time went on, my access to Cory Booker and to Christie really was limited. So I was, I was spending all of my time. I mean, Cammie Anderson, the superintendent, was quite accessible for most of the time. So I was able to see not the ground level, but, the district level, what kinds of work the reform effort entailed. And the teachers and principals in the schools were very open and accessible, but Booker and Christie became much less so.
Dale, in your book, you do a terrific job showing us some of the very real challenges that these schools are facing. Some of them have to do with a kindergarten student who doesn't have the literacy and reading skills they need to advance to first grade. And then at a high school where just boosting students' confidence in their own abilities improve their test scores. Are these two challenges related, and do you have to solve one before the other?
They are related. In the case of the high school, I remember I posed the question, how much of the achievement gap was really a hope gap? Because those kids were not, up until the time that there was this intensive effort to, increase the preparation for the tests and increase the level of literacy instruction for these kids. The truth was that Central High School, one of the problems with just the test scores was that kids were so demoralized and so disconnected from the sort of process of testing that they literally had for many years slept through the state standardized test. And the teachers said that part of their job, if you proctored the state test, was to literally lift the students up off their desks and beg them to take the test. As part of a big turnaround effort at that school, one of the things they did that was kind of just an emotional support effort was that they had a pep rally for them the day before the test, and they told them throughout their test prep sessions, this test is important for you, it's important for your school, it's important for your future. Take the test, work till the end, work till the final bell. And as it turned out, they did. That year, the teachers I went to an assembly and they were just talking with amazement, and they were thrilled that the kids had actually worked till the last bell. That was the year that they had a big jump in the test scores. So it was in part because they had much better prep. They also had used federal money to have better English and literacy instruction. But it was also because they were really told, you can do this, you must do this, we believe you can do this. And they stuck with it and they tried. And so that was my view that, there was a hope gap as well as an achievement gap in that school. Then when you look at another character in the book who's a student who had gotten to middle school and he was still reading at a second grade level, and there was just a tremendous effort of teachers and his coach and a special ed teacher and a vice principal and a principal to sort of wrap themselves around this boy and not only tutor him, but convince him that he could do better and that he needed to believe in himself. So I think that while he had really weak instruction for years, that was part of his reading deficit. I think in this kid's case, there was a tremendous hope deficit too. I think he just didn't believe that he could succeed, and he had failed for so long that the idea of doing well was something he just thought would never happen for him.
We talked about the title of your book a moment ago, and I want to talk about the idea of the prize. And there are different ways to read this. In some cases, the prize could be the students themselves, and another way the prize could be the funding. You detail in a great appendix precisely where those $200 million went. A lot of it went to consultants and to people's salaries versus what somebody might consider a direct intervention in the classroom. Do you have any sense about how maybe some of those dollars might have been better spent?
I do. One thing I found in researching the book was that while the school district gets $20,000 to $22,000 per student in funding, most of it from the state, less than half of that money reaches the school. Some of the other half goes to centrally provided services like special ed, the custodial services for the school. But there's an awful lot of breakage in between the funding source and the money that finally reaches the schools. And I thought that, when I say breakage, there's just a lot of waste. There's a lot of fat. There's a lot of extra jobs. There's probably, I'm not sure about this, but there's probably a lot of contracts that cost too much. If you look at it, the charter schools get less money per student and they get more money to the classroom. And so what you see among the highest performing charter schools, you'll see 2 teachers in an elementary school classroom instead of 1, and you'll see a tutor in every grade and social workers who actually do therapy with kids who are in distress. Whereas if you go in a district school, you'll only see 1 teacher in a classroom. If there's a tutor, it's probably for the whole school, not just for each grade. The social worker, there's usually 1 per school who doesn't even begin to have time to do therapy to address specific needs of specific children. So my view was that if there could be like a forensic accounting or something, and use the philanthropy to do that, to figure out where money is going that's keeping it from reaching children in classrooms, and then make that available to the public and have a public conversation about what kind of tough choices are we willing to make to get money to the classroom to help our kids.
You probably expected that there would be strong reaction to your book. Was there a concern in the back of your mind as this was unfolding that it might be somehow used by so-called anti-reformers to say, see, this can't be fixed, this isn't going to work?
I thought a lot about how different people would react because it's such a polarized environment, the whole discussion about education, and it's very hard to be heard unless you sort of fit into one of the 2 poles of opinion. But I really felt like if I could just write a story or a book that would lay out the truth of what kids are facing in urban schools, in schools in Newark, what teachers are facing, what the schools face in terms of the challenge of the kids, and what they are and aren't getting to meet those challenges. I thought it could actually be a public service because I felt that the conversation is all about how reform is the answer and on one side, and that the status quo is hopeless. And on the other side, it's how reform is a conspiracy and the status quo is doing the best it can. And neither of those is true, or at least neither of those is the whole truth. And I thought if I could write a story that was undisputably true, maybe the conversation could just become a broader conversation about what's really happening to kids.
Dale, you've been a reporter for almost 3 decades, and over that time you've covered a lot of topics, including education. Was there anything you saw or heard here that just surprised you?
Oh, yeah. I was surprised by, first of all, just the amount of money that Zuckerberg gave. And I was surprised by how little $100 million is when compared to the $1 billion that the Newark district spends every year. So when you think about what sounded like all the money in the world, $100 million over 5 years, that was, barely a drop compared to $1 billion every year, or $5 billion over 5 years. So I think that really, understanding how expensive an enterprise education is and how many directions money goes in put a lot in perspective for me. Another thing was just, from the philanthropic side of it, now that fantastically wealthy business magnates and investors are putting their money into education, we no longer have these philanthropies that were set up in the early 1900s by the captains of industry being, the main funders of education. We have the fortunes of living billionaires, and finding out what it is that leads them to believe that they can change education or that education is their cause was fascinating. It seems like in each case, it's a very personal story. In Zuckerberg's case, it was witnessing the way his wife in her year as a teacher was treated by others because, people saw her, in his view, as somebody who was doing charity work, not somebody who had one of the most important jobs in the world. From that, he came up with this idea that I want to use my philanthropy to raise the status of teaching in America. His main wish for this was to come up with a kind of a model transformational teacher's contract that would be, copied by districts all around the country and would reward teachers based on their performance. And of course, the teacher's contract that emerged was something less than that.
Jill Russakoff reports for the Washington Post. She's the author of the new book, The Prize, Who's in Charge of America's Schools, out this month from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Dale, thanks for making time for EWA Radio.
Well, thanks so much. It was great to be with you.
That wraps up another episode of EWA Radio. Just a reminder, we're going to be in Chicago in October talking about teacher education. We have travel scholarships available to that seminar for qualified reporters October 23rd and 24th. Get all the details at ewa.org. Hope to see you soon. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.